Welcome back to part 2 of Building and Maintaining Boundaries, delivered by Grow a Strong Family, Inc. Thank you for returning to us. We are so excited to continue with this webinar. So in the last part, we talked about what boundaries were and why they were so important. And so now we're going to look at what some of the barriers are to establishing and maintaining boundaries. And through this discussion, we will also be looking at ways to build boundaries. So let's do it. One of the barriers is mind reading. When we don't use our words and say what we want or what we mean without saying it mean, we are doing mind reading. When we expect other people to understand what our needs are or what our wants are or how we want to be treated or what is important to us, when we are expecting them to figure it out, that's called mind reading. And it's a wonderful way to erode trust and to build disrespect in relationships. And we sometimes do it, and other people do it to us. And my typical response is, I'm not a mind reader. I need you to say what you want, say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. I am not your doormat. People-pleasing is a terrible way to build boundaries, because when people engage in people-pleasing behavior, what they're really doing is they're basically accepting a lot of unacceptable behavior. They're making excuses for other people and for how they treat you and other folks. So you're never holding them accountable for behaving in a more healthy, highly functioning, constructive way. The other thing we do when we're people-pleasing is we're really not being particularly honest with other people, because we're not sharing with them what our needs and wants are. We're not asking them to engage in a peer relationship or into a more equal relationship, certainly not an authentic one. Because when people engage in people-pleasing, they are so busy trying to figure out what other people want and need that they lose track of what they want and need. And there's another word for what we call this. It's called codependence, and that's a webinar for another day. But that's what people-pleasing is. The other one is perfectionism. Whenever we expect perfection, whenever we expect things to be better than they are, it's really a premeditated resentment, because it's not reasonable and it's not real. We are imperfect beings living in an imperfect world. All that we can do is show up and do the best we can at any given time. And we're going to make a lot of mistakes, because when it comes to human interactions, a lot of the time we're just learning. When we meet new people, we're trying to get to understand them and have them understand us. There's going to be mistakes made along the way. That's how we learn. That's how we share. That's how we develop authentic relationships. But when it comes to boundaries, how can we possibly establish appropriate boundaries when we're expecting something that no human being can acquire or attain to? Fear is a big one. In 12-step programs, the fear is actually an acronym, and the acronym means, I just lost it, so we're going to move on. So, false evidence appearing real. That's what fear is. So what we're looking at is we might be rejected. If we say to somebody, this is what I need from you, or this is what needs to happen, or we're being very clear and kind and firm, and we're getting a negative response from them, we might be thinking that they're about to reject us, and they might be. Does that mean we let go of what we're asking for? If you're asking for or requiring that other people treat you in a certain way, and it is kind, and it is respectful, and it is firm, and you are prepared to do the same for other people, then if in fact they do reject you, that tells us more about them than it does about you. What it says is they're not ready to show up and take responsibility for themselves or their own behavior, and that is on them. That is not on you. When they are in a better place, they might come back. This also applies to abandonment or being shunned. Very often when we say to people, hey, you're really not on the mark here, you're treating me in a way that I don't that I don't like. I don't let anybody yell at me. I don't let anybody throw things around at me. I don't let anybody destroy my home or my car or whatever it is. So if I don't let anybody else, why would I let you? And if their response to that is, well, then I don't want to be around you, so be it. When they are in a better place, when they are healthier, they may as well come back. Another fear we have is the fear of confrontation because we have a hard time dealing with anger. This is a cultural phenomenon in the United States, and it is something that's also been very ineffective for women. Women have traditionally a more difficult time expressing anger. It doesn't mean that you don't do it. There is something called righteous anger when we need to get motivated and we need to say, no more. The buck stops here. We're not doing this anymore. Sorry. Please don't cross this line or I'm going to have to put up an electric fence. Whatever it is, when somebody is disrespectful to you, you have a right and an obligation to you and the other person to say, stop, halt, we're done with this. We are not going to continue doing this anymore. Oftentimes we feel guilty, and the guilt says we can convince ourselves, for example, that, oh my goodness, if I don't let so-and-so run rampant through the house, then they're likely to hurt themselves or somebody else, or whatever it is that is causing us to feel bad. We don't have to engage in that. If we ask ourselves, is it real? Is this true? Is this really true? What do I think about myself when I feel this way? And what would be different if I didn't even have this thought to begin with? That's from the work by Byron Katie. Excellent 4 questions. Anytime that you are feeling guilty or you're feeling as if I can't, that's a good time to start asking yourself those 4 questions from the work by Byron Katie, because chances are you can easily overcome it by confronting the thoughts, by challenging what you're thinking, because what you're thinking is holding you back from taking good, loving care of yourself. There may well be safety concerns. I know that with my loved one, she has threatened to go live in a shelter. She has threatened to live on the streets. She has threatened to kill herself. And the response has to be that, number one, she's an adult. She has the right to do whatever it is that she is going to do, and I don't have to like it, and I usually don't like it. Number two, she's using that as a way to manipulate my behavior and my response to her unwellness and her inappropriate behavior. And since I have been very firm with her in the past, and she knows that I'll do what I say, and I say what I'll do, what I said to her at that point, she was in a hospital, was, I'll be happy to bring you your clothes when she would be in a more appropriate setting, that I wouldn't be bringing her clothes so that she could go live on the streets. It was a way of saying, you can do what you're going to do, but I'm not going to participate in it. And in fact, she did turn around and make better choices. So sometimes we even have to confront the safety concerns that we have. And if we're still feeling that our loved ones will hurt themselves or other people, that is the time to be pulling out that crisis plan, looking at your safety notes. What do you need to put in place? What's already there? Now, how do you implement it? And why wouldn't you implement it? And that's what you would be challenging. So you don't have to be held hostage to the safety concerns. You don't know how to build healthy boundaries. This is not an unusual one. There are no classes that I can ever recall where they say, oh, how to build healthy relationships and how to have appropriate boundaries and how to say no by saying yes to something else and how to treat your loved ones with respect and consideration by using clear and concise language and being firm and saying what you mean and meaning what you say but not saying it mean. There are no classes. However, if you're ever inclined, you might want to check out Al-Anon, because that's a wonderful place where people who are people pleasers and codependents learn how to undo the patterns that don't allow them to express themselves as authentic, healthy people by learning how to establish boundaries. And AA does it as well. The 12-step programs are wonderful for teaching this particular skill set, as are some cognitive behavioral therapists. How do you disable the enabling with your adult children? Ask yourself these 5 questions. Number 1, does your adult child expect the things from you that you once gave willingly? That's a red flag. Another one, does it feel like you are living from crisis to crisis with your adult child? That's another red flag. And that's why it is so important to have your crisis management plan so that you know what to do so that you're not living from crisis to crisis. Do you sacrifice too much to meet your adult child's needs? Good question. How many of you are taking time off from work? How many of you are keeping them on your insurance plans or paying for their health insurance or their car insurance or a place for them to live when they are adults? And you're paying for it because they can't hold a job or they refuse to go on Social Security or they're not interested in talking to a therapist, whatever it is. This is a good question to ask yourself. What are you sacrificing? Are you working harder at their life than they are? Because that's another way to look at how are you then enabling your adult children. Are you afraid of hurting your adult child? Are you feeling burdened, used, resentful? If you're feeling those things, those are all red flags that you are enabling and that you are not empowering, and that's what needs to be disabled. There's a certain language that we use in boundaries, and there's a model of communication. And I always recommend this wonderful free resource. It's called the 7 Challenges Workbook. And in fact, you can find a link to this resource on our website, probably on the same page that you're on now with looking at this webinar. And you can also go to the 7 Challenges Workbook website. It's a terrific resource and skill, and it is free. And they talk about the I messages, but they talk about it in terms of 5 messages, not the typical 3, which is when I come home and see the house is a complete mess, it makes me feel angry when I do that. So this is what I need from you. And then your loved ones look at you and go, yeah, talk to the hand. In the 5 I messages, the model is a little bit different. So what you do, for example, is, I'm going to take the second example. When I saw the dishes in the sink, I felt irritated because I want to start cooking dinner right away, and I want to ask you to help me to do the dishes right now so that dinner will be ready by the time our guests arrive. That's an honest, complete I message. This is about how I can take good, healthy care of myself. And when I ask you to do something, I'm kind of including what the consequences are if you're not participating, but there's also an implied consequence. And the implied consequence in this is if the dishes aren't done so that I can get started on dinner, then dinner will be late. In this case, we're expecting guests, so we continue with dinner. If it were me and I did not have guests coming, I probably wouldn't cook dinner at all. And I would say I'm happy to cook dinner as soon as the dishes are done, as long as it's before 6 o'clock. And that way, and if you listen to the way I framed it, I'm taking responsibility for my part, and I'm letting you know that I'm prepared to do this as long as these things are done, and they're done in my time frame. Because, of course, if the dishes are in the sink, somebody had the opportunity earlier to take care of that issue. What is the action or behavior of boundaries? Well, it starts with acting. It starts with planning, then acting, then doing, then checking. That's the scenario. There are 10 laws of boundaries. I love this resource by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And it's basically when to say yes, how to say no to take control of your life. And the first law is the law of sowing and reaping. Basically, actions have consequences. You know, this is the funny thing, and I love this. You are free to choose, but you are not free from the consequence of your choice. If someone in your life is sowing anger, selfishness, and abuse at you, are you setting boundaries against it? If you are not, then you are encouraging the behavior that you don't want. And if you are setting boundaries, then you are letting them know that because they're not treating you well, there are consequences to that. For example, I know that if my young adult child, 18 to 25, wants to borrow the car so they could go to work, but the last time I got in the car there was no gas, what I usually would say is the following, and that would be, oh, bummer. I would love to lend you the car. However, I had to put gas in the car the last time I lent it to you, and I don't want to have to deal with that right now. So I guess you'll have to find another way to go to work. And by saying that, I'm not telling them, you're a jerk, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do the next thing. I'm just letting them know what I am going to do or how I am handling this situation. That's an enforceable statement like we talked about in the previous webinar. And that is also allowing them to realize that there are consequences for the choices they make. And one of the choices that they made in this case was to not put gas in the car so they don't get to drive a car. The law of responsibility. We are responsible to each other, not for each other. What this means is we don't rescue other people and we don't enable their behavior. We are not people pleasers. We are not going to cover for them. We don't make excuses for them. We can understand them. We can love them. We can give them the space, the resources, and tools that they may need. However, it is not our job to fix their lives. And it is not our job, actually, to fix anyone's lives but our own. The law of power. We have power over some things. We don't have power over others, including changing people. And what this really means is I refer you to the serenity prayer, which is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Wait a second, I have to get this back to myself. Okay, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And one of the things that you know right away is that your loved ones, the people in your life, the relationships you have in your life, basically so much of our living is beyond our control. The only thing we really have control over is our responses. So be mindful of that and put your energy there. The law of respect. If we wish for others to respect our boundaries, we need to respect theirs. And that means that they're allowed to protest, but they're not allowed to force us to change our boundaries any more than we're forcing anybody else to change theirs. The law of motivation. We must be free to say no before we can wholeheartedly say yes. This is actually an axiom. And very often when I work with families, especially parents, what I always say to them is that the more mistakes our children make, the more likely they are to choose success and to think before they do. So let's give them the opportunity to make as many mistakes as possible so that they can decide to live their lives a little bit differently and to take more responsibility for what is going right and what is going well in their lives. So you want to make sure that we can say no before we can wholeheartedly say yes. And another way that this looks is when you say yes to other people, make sure you're not saying no to yourself. And one of the ways that I help people do this is whenever you're asked for anything, feel free to give yourself an opportunity to say, I'm not sure, I'll get back to you when. You can say, I'll get back to you after I've checked my book or after I've consulted with my partner, or you don't have to make a decision right now. One of the things that I have practiced with my loved ones is I'll often say, if you need an answer right this minute, my immediate response is no. If you give me a little bit of time to look at my calendar and think about my schedule, I may be able to do it. But if you need a response right this minute, my answer is no. And I'm very consistent with this because I know that it is in everybody's best interest, because if I end up committing myself to something that I don't want to do, I will follow through with it, but I will not follow through with a particularly good attitude, and that's no fun for anybody, least of all me. The law of evaluation. We need to evaluate the pain our boundaries cause others. So we have to consider how severe is the boundary. Sadly, when we are not in the practice of setting appropriate limits with our loved ones, we typically have to be very firm in the beginning because we have not created a sense of responsibility or accountability prior to current times. This has been especially difficult when it comes to the use of resources. I have worked with families, very affluent families, who did not teach their children how to manage money. So they're bailing their loved ones out well into adulthood, and they're starting to feel resentful of this, and they need to set some limits on it. But when they haven't ever set limits on money and resources, it becomes a very difficult time for their adult children. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but it means that you do it with thought and care. Basically, you created this mess. How are you going to get yourself out of this mess? And doing it in a way that is kind at this point. It doesn't mean I'm not going to pay your rent next month when I've been paying your rent for the past 5 years. It might mean that you need to figure out how to get your rent paid over the next 6 months, because after that time, I'm not prepared to pay any more rent. That's reasonable. So you want to kind of look at how are you balancing what you need with what they need, and how are you going to reconcile it in a way that even if there's pain or discomfort, it's not such a hardship that they hate you for it. And they might hate you anyway. I mean, there's nothing that will protect adult children and their parents from engaging in a dance where they want their independence, they want their freedom, and yet they're dependent and needy on you. And if you're with a partner, it could be the same thing. It doesn't mean that that's a stop sign. What it means is that it's a problem that needs to be solved, and we can find ways to solve it. And chances are there's going to be discomfort along the way. Discomfort we can deal with. Out and out pain because you're being perceived as mean and you're doing it in a mean way is very different. The law of proactivity. We take action to solve problems based on our values, wants, and needs. And this is really important, how good you are at problem solving. Very often when families do not have healthy boundaries, they're not very good at problem solving because they don't know where the lines in the sand are. And they also tend to have greater rigidity where it's my way or the highway, and that, again, doesn't promote constructive, healthy problem solving. So in the law of proactivity, we recognize that there are problems that need to be solved. So the question then becomes, how do we do this? In other words, we take action from the thinking state, not the emotional state. The law of envy. We will never get what we want if we focus our boundaries onto what others have. Look at the choices you have in your life and only focus on those. You are not living other people's lives, and from the outside looking in, they may look like they have way more together, more organized, more put together, but in fact they may not. Not your focus anyway. Your focus needs to be on your life and what's going on there and what makes sense based on the needs of you and your family and your loved ones. The law of activity. We need to take the initiative to solve our problems rather than being passive. So we really have to be very proactive. We have to be willing to show up. We have to be willing to identify that there is a problem to be solved and to start looking at ways that we can solve it. If you do not, you're going back to the silent agreements. And when you go back to the silent agreements, what you're basically saying is, we're not going to solve this problem. We're just going to continue going in this dance, even though it's taking us absolutely nowhere. And the law of exposure. We need to communicate our boundaries. A boundary that is not communicated is a boundary that is not working. Make clear what we do or do not want and what we will or will not tolerate. Every boundary violation has a consequence. A boundary without a consequence is nagging. I'm going to repeat that because I think it's so important. A boundary that is not communicated is a boundary that is not working. Make clear what we do or do not want and what we will or will not tolerate. Every boundary violation has a consequence. A boundary without a consequence is nagging. Some boundary activities include turning your words into gold. Review Bernstein's list of parenting suggestions, create enforceable statements, and practice the 5-step I statements. These can all be found at growastrongfamily.org, Boundaries. We have a slew of helpful resources. In this webinar, we discussed boundaries, the what, the how, the why, what the building blocks are, what the barriers are, how to disable the enabling. We talked about the 5-step I messages. We talked about the 10 laws, and we briefly touched upon activities to promote healthier boundaries. When best laid plans fail, stick to your normal routines as much as you can. Eat and drink in moderation. Plan on exercise. Build in nature time. Make sure you have backup plans. Keep music you love on hand and listen to it when you need to. Prioritize your time, activities, and commitments to do what you want to and what you can do. And ultimately, take good, loving care of yourself. Again, I refer you more information on Grow a Strong Family can be found at our website, growastrongfamily.org, email and phone. And as always, take what you like and leave the rest. We're not responsible for how the content or the presentation is used. So thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar on building and maintaining boundaries. We look forward to your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.